Good afternoon, everyone. Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues, I'm very pleased to welcome you here today to the International Peace Institute for this policy forum on Kenya's National Peacebuilding and Prevention Strategy. My name is Jenna Russo. I'm the Director of Research at IPI and head of the Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations, and it's my pleasure to moderate our event here today. The Secretary General's policy brief, A New Agenda for Peace, calls for a more deliberate and explicitly universal approach to prevention based on national ownership. In 2023, Kenya commissioned a review of its national peace-building architecture, undertaking a process that also drew on the insights and contributions of local peace builders and civil society. And today we have the wonderful opportunity to learn from the experience of Kenya, which has demonstrated its leadership in taking forward the call from the New Agenda for Peace. We're particularly fortunate today to draw on the insights of several of our Kenyan colleagues who are here in New York and will be able to provide their firsthand insights on this process. I'd like to thank our partners on today's event, including the Life and Peace Institute and the permanent missions of Kenya, Norway, and Sweden to the UN. We have a full slate of speakers today, so I will keep my remarks very brief, and I will hand over the floor right away to our speakers to provide opening remarks. First, I'm happy to welcome Ambassador Andreas Lovold, Deputy Permanent Representative of Norway to the United Nations, followed by Elizabeth Mary Spihar, Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support in DPPA, and Shamsa Abubakar, Deputy Chair for the Independent Panel of Advisors for the Kenyan Peacebuilding Review. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for those warm and kind welcoming regards. Excellencies, distinguished guests and friends, warmly welcome to this event and to all participants, both here physically in the room and to you participating digitally, and not the least to the panelists, which we'll come back to. As a co-host, let me also start by thanking especially IPI for hosting us. And to Sweden as a co-host as well, but not the least to our friends from the Kenyan delegation, bringing very interesting perspectives and experience with them, which we so much look forward to not only listening to your experience, but also to take that experience with us and be inspired. Today's entry point for discussion of prevention is not just a timely one, but a very important one. Because in the UN context, usually prevention tends to become either a very abstract term, or it's even becoming also quite politicized. Therefore, there has been, which is positive, an increased interest by the majority of UN member states to listening to get input, to move that discourse from a very conceptual and abstract kind of term into a very concrete one and make it practical. And that's why the event today is so important, because it gives us that tool in ensuring that we are moving into a more practical and operational perspective on prevention. Because obviously there is no one-size-fits-all approach to prevention. So this is exactly why we need to learn from each other and take the best of examples, of good examples that we know have worked well, and also learn from cases where we know experiences have been less successful from all countries. And I think this is definitely important in terms of the ambition to have long-term or have an interest in building on and providing long-term effects of the prevention strategies. Norway has consistently put strong emphasis on the need to strengthen our efforts on conflict prevention. And 2024 is shaping up to be a very important year, or a significant year in that regard. So I'm going to try to be very brief, and let me highlight just three kind of broad entry points to the discussion. First, the global level, or the intergovernmental level. This year's Summit of the Future, and also the ongoing and the forthcoming negotiations on the Pact for the Future, are very important opportunities to recommit ourselves to prevention at global level. The shared interests by member states are promising. First, a strengthened peacebuilding commission. Secondly, an adequate financing for peacebuilding. And thirdly, also sustaining peace are amongst the most universally supported parts of the draft so far in the Pact for the Future related to peace and security. The peacebuilding architecture review follows directly in time after the Summit of the Future. And in this process, we will do our best to reform and also enabling the relevant UN institutions and bodies to even better assist partners in delivering on their ambitions for more and better prevention and peace building. Secondly, the regional and the national level. So in parallel to what takes place at the global or in the intergovernmental level, we must also work at both the regional and the national level to improve prevention mechanisms and to make them effective in terms of concrete action. At the regional level, we have many good examples of strengthened efforts on prevention by regional organizations like the African Union, and also on the sub-regional level, like a sub-regional organization like ECOWAS. ECOWAS has, for instance, developed its own conflict prevention framework, and this should definitely inspire other regional organizations to do the same. And from our own region, we also have examples on specific prevention cooperation from the Nordic countries, which are lessons to draw on, where the cities of Oslo in Norway and Malmö in Sweden have collaborated and shared experiences on inclusion of youth and prevention of crime in cities. And then at the national level, let me just stress that Norway has so much to learn from Kenya. Kenya's model for conducting an open and inclusive review in its peace-building architecture with extensive involvement by the civil society organization and groups, and using this as a basis for developing concrete policy recommendations to the government is a textbook example of best practice. Norway has currently no single overarching peace-building or prevention strategy, but rather a range of sectoral prevention strategies in the field of, for instance, organized crime, violent extremism, social cohesion, etc. But they all place whole of society and whole of government approaches at the center. But the sectoral or siloed structure still shines through. We will share more of this in tomorrow's meeting on the prevention in the Peacebuilding Commission meeting. But learning about other countries' more integrated models or holistic models, like the Kenyans' own experience, is very valuable to us. Thirdly, and finally, the principle of inclusion. Participation of local civil society, not the least women's organizations, or at least women-led organizations, is in our view a critical prerequisite to effective conflict prevention in the long term. As we have seen the past few weeks here in New York, with a large amount of civil society actors and organizations participating in the Commission of the Status of Women, they inhabit unique knowledge and expertise on peace building and conflict prevention we cannot do without. And they are really on the front line and brings with them extremely not only useful, but key experience to bring with us. The UN generally has improved its mechanisms for involvement by the civil society organizations in a significant manner, but more can still definitely be done. The Peacebuilding Fund is particularly well placed to draw on the experiences of a broad range of countries when assisting in developing peace building and prevention plans or structures. That said, I look very much forward to today's discussion and to continuing our conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I want to start off as well by thanking very much the International Peace Institute, the permanent missions of Kenya Norway, and Sweden, and the Life and Peace Institute for hosting this very important and timely event. I want to particularly thank and commend Kenya for being here to share with us very generously their national peacebuilding and prevention strategy, and also a very warm welcome to all of our Kenyan colleagues who traveled all this way to be with us here today. We're very honored to have you here. I wanted to start by picking up on Ambassador Lovold's point about 2024 being an important moment for our discussions and our joint work on prevention and peace building. In fact, we're not even finishing out quite yet the first quarter of the year, and there already have been a number of quite important events to kick everything off. For example, last week at its open debate under the presidency of Japan, the Security Council discussed the promotion of conflict prevention through empowerment of all actors, including women and youth, building on the Secretary General's policy brief, a new agenda for peace. I was at that particular session, and I was really impressed at how many countries were clamoring to speak at this open debate. In fact, I believe they had to have the debate over 2 days because so many countries wanted to have their say. And very positively, there was very strong support being shown precisely for strengthening our tools on prevention and peace building. Secondly, as Ambassador Lovold just mentioned as well, tomorrow there will be a session of the Peacebuilding Commission, the Intergovernmental Peace Building Commission at the United Nations, which will involve the case studies of 3 countries. So it will be, again, Kenya, along with Norway, as well as Timor-Leste. And they will be talking to us, they will be talking to the members of the PBC on their national efforts for prevention and peace building and their lessons learned. I believe that today and tomorrow's session are really excellent opportunities to hear from these particular cases, starting with Kenya today. And I think that there will be a lot indeed to be learned from all of those cases. So I'm hoping that that will both inspire countries individually to see what more they can do in their countries to try to strengthen their tools for prevention and peace building, and for trying to eliminate all forms of violence, of systemic violence in their societies. But I'm also hoping that these very interesting, very concrete examples will help our member states as they look forward to the Summit of the Future and the final crafting of the Pact for the Future. And indeed, I would add the 2025 Peacebuilding Architecture Review, which will quite soon be underway, and I hope that that will also help us to strengthen our tools. So that being said, I wanted to just also underscore 3 additional points. First of all, I wanted to recall that in a new agenda for peace, the Secretary General came out quite boldly to try to shift the paradigm on prevention along 2 priority lines. First of all, and Jenny, you mentioned it, the recognition of the universal responsibility of all states to prevent conflict and violence within their societies. And secondly, the emphasis on national action and ownership, and including through the development of national prevention strategies, and indeed regional prevention strategies, which the ambassador also mentioned, the importance of the regional level and regional level. Universality, of course, means recognizing that every single country has drivers of conflict, and therefore every single country should be ready to address those conflict drivers through nationally led political and financial investments. And this leads me to my second point. When we talk about nationally led and nationally owned processes, prevention efforts, peace building efforts, and based on the examples of what works, what we have seen works in different country contexts, we know that we should be aiming for inclusive national ownership. In other words, as was also mentioned a moment ago, we have to look at comprehensive whole of society approaches to prevention and peace building if we want to be effective. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that from our Kenyan friends. This is not a new concept, of course. In 2018, there was a landmark report called Pathways for Peace that was jointly put together by United Nations and the World Bank. And it was very categoric about the fact that inclusion has to be at the center of prevention efforts. And so in this respect, as we know, the role of civil society is absolutely essential. And what that also means, I would say, is that all governments, when they're looking at prevention and peace building, need to acknowledge this role and ensure the necessary political and policy space for civil society actors to be full participants and engage meaningfully. And that is not always the case. My third point is that as international partners, which we are at United Nations, there's also the international financial institutions, international NGOs, and many others, bilateral supporters. The international partners that are trying to support countries on prevention and peace building need to come together in very coherent and coordinated ways when countries ask us to support them. And that may seem obvious, but believe me, it doesn't happen all the time. In fact, it needs to happen a lot more than it is in actual fact. We know that prevention, working on prevention, is a complex effort. It entails many different instruments, and it entails looking across what we call at the UN, the humanitarian development and peace dimensions. In terms of the needs in a society. And so all of that has to come together. So if the various international actors and supporters are not coming together appropriately and ideally with the financial instruments well aligned and everyone supporting according to their respective comparative advantages, we are not going to be as effective as we could be. And I think that's something we need to work more on. The Peacebuilding Commission was mentioned. I mentioned it again a bit earlier. This is an intergovernmental body at the UN that was also mentioned quite specifically in a new agenda for peace as a body that should be enhanced and strengthened in order to play an even more meaningful role in the peace and security architecture at United Nations. And it's also a body that could be very helpful in terms of bringing more coherence to the international community's support efforts to the benefit of prevention and peace building. And I have to say that the Peacebuilding Fund, the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund, which my office manages on the SG's behalf, also has a very important, if you will, coherence role, integrating role, because we are a pooled fund. It's a pooled funding mechanism which brings various parts of the UN system and national and local stakeholders together in a single exercise to help build and sustain peace. And I think we need more of that. When we talk about international cooperation and support for prevention and peace building, I also wanted to mention the area of South-South triangular cooperation. This is something I hope could be enhanced through the Peacebuilding Commission, the work of the Peacebuilding Commission, also the work that we support through the PBF, and through many other ways. I don't have time to go into why I think SSTC, which is the acronym, is so important, but in terms of South-South cooperation in particular, what I do see is that it opens up an entirely additional range of member states of countries that have something to provide, whom we don't usually consider as part of the usual cohort of international supporters in this field. And I think it could be something very good. G7 Plus is an institution that talks about fragile to fragile cooperation. And so it's a question of countries coming also from a state of fragility or conflict that can show very direct lessons of what they went through and help others in similar situations. But turning back to today's focus, which is Kenya, and I will soon be concluding. I don't know the Kenyan example in great detail, and I'm therefore very much looking to hearing from the panel. But I do understand that Kenya's Peacebuilding Architecture Review has generated important insights into precisely the three things that I highlighted right now. And I think that, again, we can all very much benefit from this. And as I do start to conclude, I do want to confirm that as the Peacebuilding Support Office of the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs at the UN, we really do stand ready to continue to work with a range of member states that may be interested in our support for their peacebuilding priorities, for their prevention and peacebuilding strategies or national infrastructures for peace, including through the support of the Peacebuilding Fund. In the case of Kenya, for example, a new 2-year initiative just began a couple of months ago, which is aimed at strengthening local governance in parts of Kenya, including facilitating community dialogues and improving relations between borderland communities in the Northeast and between those communities in the Northeast and the security forces. And this initiative is just one example of the type of initiative that the UN country teams can support. And when member states are looking to get support for prevention and peacebuilding, and this particular initiative implemented by UNDP, WFP, and OHCHR has a particular focus on the local and community levels. To the point of, again, the importance of civil society, this is something that we very much believe in at United Nations, and I'm very pleased to mention that last year, our department started a UN civil society peace builders dialogue that we hope will be an annual event. And we think it's essential because this will allow us to get good policy insight and advice from a wide spectrum of civil society actors, including from our partner countries in the South. So thank you very much for your attention. And again, I really look forward to ceding the floor to our Kenyan friends. Thank you.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shams Abubakar. I'm the Vice Chair of the Independent Panel of Advisors. I come from Mombasa, Kenya. First and foremost, I would like to thank my government for giving us this opportunity to review the peace building process. We were tasked to do strategic leadership and give direction on the review process. And I would also like to introduce my fellow IPA members who are here. We are 13, but only 3 managed to come. And our robust and elite IPA leader from Mombasa, Sheikh Abdullahi, is online. Sheikh Abdullahi, can you say hi? Can you hear me? Yeah, he's silent. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sheikh Abdullahi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Irene, a member of the Panel.
Thank you, Irene. Father Mutie. Yeah, and I would like to convey the greetings of our Chair, General Opande, a renowned peace builder in Kenya. He could not be with us, he's not feeling well. So we need your prayers for him. We were tasked by the government, as I said earlier, to provide the leadership, strategic leadership on the review process. We had a peace building architecture, but we had it since 2014, and you all know the types of conflicts are changing. So there was a need to review it. And with the honor of the government, they decided to select a few of us who are working on peace building matters to come up with a new agenda for peace for our country. As you all know, during elections time, Kenya goes through a lot of pull and push factors, especially peace. And you also know there is about the digital peace conflict, where 70% of our youths are involved in with the mis and disinformation. We have a lot of conflict typologies which come even from neighboring countries. The peace building architecture for Kenya is not for Kenya only, it's for global. If we have managed to do it, I believe each and every other country can do it. We also thank the UN, who have been our supportive system. Without them, we could not be here. And I thank the IPI also and the Swedish Embassy for giving us this opportunity today to come and tell you what we have done in conjunction with our UN representative. I will not talk much today because my robust elite IPA member who has a lot of wisdom, and we've worked with him throughout the year in trying to get a review process which is beneficial to the whole world. He will give the in-depths on what we did, how we did it, and why we are here today. Thank you very much and be blessed.
Thank you so much to that and for all of the opening remarks. And it's now my pleasure to turn to our panel of speakers. Joining us today is Dr. Raymond Amolo, who is the Deputy Minister of the Interior and National Administration for the Government of Kenya. Prior to his current role, Dr. Amolo was the Managing Director of the Lake Basin Development Authority and has more than 20 years of experience in research, corporate governance, leadership, and strategic management. And I should say they have very full bios, and I won't read all of them, but you do have access to them. And with their kind permission, I'll read an abridged version of each bio. Next, we're pleased to welcome our online guest today, Sheikh Abdullahi Abdi from the Independent Panel of Advisors for Kenya's Peacebuilding Review. Mr. Abdullahi has been a community worker most of his life, including among the pastoralist communities of northern Kenya. He is an advocate for human rights for Kenyans, a peace worker, and a mediator. Next, to my left, we have Rana Taha, who is the Peace and Development Advisor within the United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office in Kenya. Rana has over 20 years of international experience, both at UN headquarters and in the field, focused on development and peace-building interventions. And she prioritizes national perspectives and local voice in her work. And finally, to my far left, we have Leslie Connolly, who is a team leader for the global policy at the Life and Peace Institute based in Nairobi. Leslie works to support meaningful engagement between local and global actors in effort to make policies less remote to and more influenced by the everyday experiences of those living in conflict. Prior to her time at LPI, Leslie was a senior policy analyst here at IPI, so we're very happy to welcome her back with a focus on peace building, prevention, and sustaining peace. So a warm welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you so much for being here. Dr. Amolo, if I can, I'd like to turn to you first. Can you tell us a bit about Kenya's process in reviewing its peace-building architecture? Why was it a priority for you to create a national peace-building and prevention strategy? And what do you think other member states can learn from Kenya's experience? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would want to thank the IPI and of course the partner states who are co-hosting this event with us. Now, it's an honor for Kenya's peace building architecture team and myself to be able to share some of the perspectives based on the journey that we have undertaken. And just as Shamsha had indicated, it's the first time that we were doing a review of our peace building architecture. I would want to focus primarily on just two questions. One is that how do the member states in both the fragile and non-fragile context understand the universality of prevention in the new agenda for peace? And secondly, what lessons from the Kenyan case can help inform other countries seeking to create a national peace building and prevention strategies? So first, as a country, we believe in multilateralism as a mechanism to be able to advance peace, security, human rights, sustainable development, and cohesion. Now, the challenges for peace, as we've all listened to the speakers before me, is that they are global, and we must be able to leverage on the existing collective security system that's under the United Nations so that then we're able to address them. And there is no single country that is immune to inter or interstate conflict. And looking at even the situation of Kenya, which is fairly a very peaceful state, but you look around us, there is a litany of huge insecurity challenges, whether it's the situation in the DRC, whether it's the situation in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Somalia, all over. Now, as such, the universality of peace and development challenges demands that all states take up responsibilities that are both inward and outward looking. Now, under the peace diplomacy pillar, which is one of our foreign policy, we have prioritized prevention and mediation of conflict at both the regional and global level. And I think I've already mentioned about the different countries around us within the region, and what we have done as a country is there for all to see, starting with our interventions, the Nairobi mediation and action that took us to the DRC, the situation within IGAD, trying to support the teams, the warring teams in Sudan, looking at what is happening in Ethiopia as well. And we have also actively participated to strengthen the AU African peace and security architecture, as well as in the regional early warning and response mechanisms, particularly in IGAD conflict under the East African Community Mechanism. Now, to be able to sustain peace, just as I've indicated, is that all the states have to be involved. Now, the current system, however, does not adequately reflect this fact, whether you're looking at it from the point of being inclusive, as well as the financing mechanisms that exist. At the AU, we are currently championing the institutional reforms, and our president is tasked with that responsibility to lead in that front. Now, what are some of the lessons from Kenya that can help inform other countries who are seeking to create the national peace building and prevention strategy? One key or one fundamental thing is a political buy-in at all levels, both from the top all the way to the lowest level, so that then we're able to anchor prevention and goodwill whenever possible. Now, the review process and implementation is one of the priorities by His Excellency, the President. And by having set up the independent panel of advisors to review that, goes to demonstrate how crucial this exercise is and the political goodwill by the leader of the nation. Now, we've also undergone other processes that involves the political players. And one of such processes is the National Dialogue Committee, which was a bipartisan process, and the product of that process is currently in discussion, which is going to lead to a number of adjustments in our institutional framework. Now, the new architecture prioritizes peace building and prevention approaches as opposed to securitized response to address violence. Of course, the natural default whenever there are conflicts is to send in the security officer so that then you're able to deal with it. Now, what we are looking at is, before we even imagine to focus on the securitization of this process, how do we strike a balance between that and what would be a much more holistic peace building process? Now, the review took a comprehensive approach and addresses all forms of violence in Kenya and offers proposals for managing some of the cells when countering violent extremism, strengthening the civil society organization, as well as addressing the new and emerging digital threats, such as online hate speech, mis or disinformation, and reforms from the political process. This particular review was people-centered, and the team was able to engage over 10,000 participants from across the Kenyan society, from all sectors, whether in government institutions, at the sub-national government level, because within the country we have the national and the county governments, and independent experts, ordinary citizens, and women and youth who more often than not bear the greatest brunt of insecurity or lack of peace. And this process placed people, particularly those at risk, at the center of the review. And it was also a very truly independent and self-critical process, as it exposed us to the real concerns that exist. Now, the review has highlighted the importance of sustainable and, in the long run, national-driven financing for peace building, not only to ensure continuity in its financial environment, but also to enable a more strategic, coordinated national approach to peace building. And in this regard, Kenya will set up a multi-partner trust fund that leverages blended financing from government, private sector, donors, and other primarily focused on the prevention and sustaining the peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Omalo. I'm busy taking notes over here from your talk, and a couple points just to emphasize. No country is immune from conflict. The importance of political buy-in at all levels, and that's why I'm excited we have representatives here today from civil society, the government, the international level to hear those perspectives, and then a holistic approach. And I think particularly at this moment in time where we're seeing such a turn toward militarization and investment in security spending, it's really important to think about a holistic peace building process, and we look forward to hearing more about that. Sheikh, I'll now turn to you. You've spent your career working with and advocating for the rights and interests of local communities within Kenya. We'd like to hear a bit more about your role on the independent panel of advisors for the Peace Building Review and the process of putting together the national strategy, and why you view this as an important tool for Kenya. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for greetings to everybody. As was mentioned earlier by my Vice Chairman, Madam Shamsa, who is there, we were led by General Opande, a well-decorated soldier who was involved in peacekeeping globally well known, and also a key person in terms of peace building within the country. Regretfully, today he could not join us because he's not feeling well, and we should all pray for his quick recovery. As was mentioned, the independent panel of advisors is composed of 13 people. The 13 that come from different sectors. Most of them are independent and are not attached to the government. And true to the word, the government which established this panel gave us full freedom and independence. They were not influencing the decisions that we were making. They were not influencing the pattern we followed in terms of collecting information. They were not influencing any other parties that we contacted in terms of coming up on the assessment. So we thank His Excellency the President who gave us that room. And at the same time, we thank His Excellency the President who accepted the full report as we presented it to him, and he gave us full commitment that it will be implemented to the letter. So we thank him for that. The panel was tasked to do an assessment of the current status within the country in terms of peace building architecture. Also to assess the conflicts that are there, the major ones and the minor ones. We have got intra within the country, and also we have got external ones that affect us along the border. The team did not come up with findings. We went around the whole country. We wanted to get the voice of the people of Kenya. And this meant that we have to contact people from every region, from the farthest frontiers that normally is not penetrated to the lowest level of the structure of government, from the ward level to the county levels to the national level. We talk to the ordinary people, we talk to the religious leaders, we talk to youth, we talk to women. We talk to the various professionals within the country and the associations that they represent, including the law society, including the judiciary, including lawyers, including architects, including teachers. So we try to the best of our ability that we get a full coverage of the whole country. We talk to the government structures that are there. We talk to politicians, both the ones in the government and the ones in the opposition. To our surprise, the reception we got both from the government and from the opposition in terms of input into this process was unbelievable. They were not only cooperative, but they were ready to tell us, please come up with your recommendations so that we can support you with the legal framework that is required to implement whatever you are going to implement. So this process left no one out. As far as what we discovered was most of the grievances that are there Some are new ones, and some are as old as post-colonial periods, and some are pre-colonial. So we try to address all of them in terms of what our suggestions are. And the report is not a report of the panel of advisors. The report is the voice of the people of Kenya. And what came out of the report is that we should always look at the possibility of trying to prevent conflicts rather than waiting for the security people to move in, and then we have got a different situation altogether. It is not lost to us that conflicts are not only what happens inside the country. As we very well know, there are two major conflicts that are happening at the global level at the moment. We have got the Middle Eastern one, which is in Gaza. Then we have got the other one in Ukraine. This one affected the whole world, and it also affected Kenya up to the level whereby food prices were affected, fuel prices were affected. So we live to the reality that whatever we are recommending locally, we have also to find out how this can be spread out. One of the reasons why today our representatives are in New York is that whatever we have come out, we believe that we should share with the other partners that we can have globally. As was mentioned by our permanent secretary, our principal secretary, it has been realized that there are a lot of players at the moment, in the past, and also in the future, who are non-governmental. We have got CSOs, we have got NGOs, we have got religious leaders, we have got community leaders, we have got women and youth group who are working on these things. Unfortunately, there is no much collaboration between the government organs and these people. In terms of funding, even the government gave very little amounts to the institutions that are involved in peace within the country. So their capacity implementing peace building was very, very much limited. Then we have got NGOs and CSOs that raise their own funds separately, independently, and they try to contribute in terms of peace building. What they contribute is very, very important, but it's very negligible in terms of capacity and size. So this report came up with a recommendation that actually there must be a cooperation and coordination between the government activities and the civil society and all the other partners that are going to be there. As was clearly explained by the principal secretary, we have recommended that actually we should have a peace building fund, which is going to be a partnership between the government and the non-governmental organizations that are going to be there. There will be proper coordination. Another key thing which came out is, from experience, it was learned that at the grassroots level, at the bottom level, is the time actually that you can stop a lot of these things. And what we have said is that the approach right now should be right from the bottom. It should be bottoms up rather than from top down. And this has been accepted, and we think that's going to be assisting in terms of peacekeeping, peace building. The other thing which we found out is capacity of mediators at the national level. There are a lot of people who are working in peace building, but we believe there's a capacity that you can actually immediately cannot call upon professionals or people who are capable and are competent enough at a short notice to participate in mediation. We also recommended that actually there should be a possibility of building capacity of people at the national level in terms of immediate emergency responses and to mediate in different situations. So the review has recommended that actually, other than just this recommendation, there must be a follow-up. There must be proper implementation mechanism, and there must be supervision of that implementation. We have discussed with all the different organs. One of the major players is the man who is sitting at the panel there, who is the principal secretary, who has been working with us very, very closely. We have got the support of the opposition party within the country and all the non-governmental organizations there. We call upon all the players who are there to join us in hand so that we can implement these things. Finally, what I want to talk about is our experiences right now globally. There is a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety what's happening globally. We have got institutions like the United Nations that everybody has been looking at in terms of providing leadership, in terms of providing security, and in terms of upholding the conventions and the treaties that have been done globally. Unfortunately, we witness today that actually the United Nations has also become incompetent to do anything. In fact, they have become incapable of making decisions because of some powerful nations. We believe that everybody must come on board, and I think United Nations must play its rightful role in terms of peace building and conflict. They must be given the room that they require, not the current status whereby it's being dictated today what's happening globally. We support that, And we do believe that there's a lot of voices that currently are coming out from the south, which is complaining about what's being done by the north. I think we have to sit down together between the north and the south and find out a solution to global issues. And I think that's absolutely important. We call upon other partners to come and join us. We are looking at these things not as a Kenyan thing. We are looking at a regional thing for Africa, and we're also looking at this thing at the global level. So please let us join hands. We are peace builders, and let us see how we can create a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those comments, and very interesting to hear about the wide reach that you had in terms of engaging with communities. It's not an easy thing to do, to be inclusive of different voices and perspectives. And I hope we can come back to this a bit in the Q&A session to find out what that looks like when it comes to the implementation phase, and to make sure that implementation remains inclusive and bottom up. So hoping we can turn back to you on that again soon. Rana, I'll turn to you next. As a UN Peace and Development Advisor in Kenya, can you speak a bit about the lessons you've learned about the role that the UN and country teams can play in supporting member states and the development and implementation of their national peace-building architectures? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you, colleagues. I want to start by first congratulating the government of Kenya for this incredible journey and product, for creating the space also for the UN to support the process, and for having such an incredibly credible process. It's not every day that we see governments having the intellectual integrity to come and look at self in the mirror and say, what have we done right? What have we done wrong? And how can we improve? And I think the reason why us as the UN think this is a great example is exactly because of that, because we need more governments globally, not only in the South. Today we see the world. We need it more in the North as well. We need it everywhere, that governments have the intellectual integrity to look internally and say, independently, through independent voices, how can we involve the entire society to look at peace building and come up with plans for peace building? So Kenya is a great global example for all of us on all of these points. I want to highlight a couple of points on principles that we as UN have implemented in the work that we've done in supporting the government of Kenya. The first one is our belief, but also through implementation, the principle of national ownership, that no matter what, we cannot go ahead of government. Government has to be in the front, and the UN is there to support. So we can provide the technical expertise, we can provide the financial resources, we can bring in the right people to come and support the process, but we always wanted to ensure that the government is heavily involved, national ownership is deepened with every step of the way. And this is what Pia Somolo have spoken about with the political will and political leadership that the country has had. Without that, we would not have gone this far. A few lessons or the way we've intervened and supported as UN, maybe intervened is not the right word, supported the entire process, is the first thing is really about recognizing strengths, because most of the time as peace builders, as actors, as also UN, we look at problems. We don't look at what works well. So I think we started from the place of saying, oh my God, Kenya is a great story. How can we tell it more? How can we ensure that this great story continues to being a great story and move forward? So that's the first thing, is recognizing the strength and working with national actors to even push this further. Identifying entry points, having the discussions, relationships, networks within the country around the theme, having the trust of the national partners to have that kind of conversation with them, knowing that we understand what national ownership means, is also very, very important. That helped us in identifying the right entry points, helped us in identifying, also co-creating the path forward, because it's also about how do we go. Yes, we had the elections, and the elections of Kenya were one of the most peaceful elections, despite the fact that it was, nail-biting moment for everyone watching it, but they proved to be extremely peaceful. So what are the factors, what are the systems that supported the production of this, and what can we learn globally from this system? This is a real democracy with real competitive politics, and yet it produced peaceful elections. And how can we ensure that this continues to be the pattern and that this is not a hit and miss? So one of the things that we also did as UN is really building on our most important asset, and sometimes it's our only asset, depending on the context we work in, which is our convening power, and bringing in the different actors from civil society, from international organizations, from government, to come together and to co-create what is the vision for Kenya for peace building. But connected to that, I think this is also a little bit of the addition and contribution of the UN in partnership with other international partners like LPI, is really trying to connect the hyper-local with the hyper-international, and keeping an eye on the global debate that's going on about the new agenda for peace, the pact for the future, the summit of the future, all of this, and the work that we're doing, and seeing how can we make the connection? How can this work contribute globally? That this work is also recognized, not only affects positively the lives of Kenyans, but affects positively lives globally. So I think this is really important. Also, while bringing all of these partners together, I think that ensuring that the partners from the beginning agree on the principles of the process, that we, despite it being subconsciously maybe agreed on by the government of Kenya, by other actors, bringing it to the top of the table. And these principles, the first one is independence. In order for us to create a credible product, we need it to be independent. The second one is inclusivity, meaningful inclusivity, not tick the box inclusivity, which is often the case. And inclusivity is super painful. It's not easy to do. It takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of tears and blood. I know that some of the colleagues who supported the process are with us today and watching us online. So it's not easy, but you have to, and my job is to really keep pushing the envelope on questions of inclusivity. And if it wasn't for the partnership of an open government and open independent panel, we would not have been able to achieve that. Also, depoliticization of the process, which is extremely important. In any place where you have such important work being done, you're agreeing on its independence, but you have the risk also of politicization. So I want to thank the independent panel who kept also ensuring that the government of Kenya is involved, that the opposition is involved, and ensure that this process, despite it being an important political milestone, it's not politicized. I want to just end by giving two last points. That the first one is that I think the role of the UN was also to ensure that we have our own intellectual integrity by saying we need a third eye on the process. And that's why we involved the Life and Peace Institute as an independent civil society organization to ensure that we as UN also are providing the correct support at the right level that we want, and that we're living up to all of the principles that we've said we want to follow. Lastly, our contribution is also about planting seeds for implementation, and that happens only if you have true national ownership, which I'm extremely grateful and proud to say in the meeting that we had with His Excellency, the President, where the IPA presented the report to His Excellency, I will use the quote that he told us. He when he met with us, he told us, you know, my problem with this work is that you probably do not understand how important your work has been. This is not about the peace-building architecture. This is about nation architecture. And we thought that was extremely heartwarming and also summarizes the level of commitment of the government represented by the head of state. I'll end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rana. Next, I'll turn to Leslie. I mean, we've heard a lot about inclusivity today, meaningful inclusivity, certainly not something that's easy to achieve, as Rana mentioned. I know in my own work, we hear a lot about being people-centered and community-based, and it's not actually easy to achieve in practice. So I'm hoping you can speak a bit more about that, about your role with LPI, and about how the process was meaningfully inclusive, and maybe a bit about how that helped to enhance the legitimacy and efficacy of the strategy. So over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jenna, and thanks to having us here today. As has been shared throughout 2023, the Life and Peace Institute supported the inclusion of civil society in the Kenya Peacebuilding Architecture Review. The review has been a really important process for Kenya and an opportunity to ensure the meaningful inclusion of a vast array of civil society voices. In peacebuilding reviews, as we've heard, and the nature of peace and security itself, there's a real complexity in ensuring that what comes out of these reviews really represents the views and perspectives and concerns of the country. And in this process, we can say it really does, because there was a real focus on the methodology. The independent panel of advisors and the support of the UN really recognized the need to make sure that there was a process that brought different views in. LPI was invited to support quite early on, and we were first invited to share our perspectives from our engagement in the 2020 Peacebuilding Architecture Review at the global level and other processes that we've supported to really think about a methodology and an approach that would bring civil society in a meaningful manner. So from the start, there was a real commitment, as you've heard today, for inclusion. We were then invited to convene a series of meetings that allowed us to bring community-based networks into the process, to create space for community expertise, and provide opportunity for technical peacebuilding experts to support the development of recommendations that would then address the core issues in the country. Our work is really guided by meaningful engagement. Meaningful engagement is a concept and methodology that really is trying to balance power and to foster space for conversations and create stronger relationships. It's influenced by different experiences and really make sure that in any type of convening we do, there's the right people around the table, the right facilitation, and the equitable and collaborative nature of participation. And we found that when you do this, you're able to come out with stronger impact and stronger outcomes. So the first event that we did in collaboration with the panel was bringing youth leaders from Nairobi's informal settlements in a participatory mapping exercise. Youth leaders are highly influential, but they're often excluded from these processes. And our long-term engagement as LPI in the informal settlements in Nairobi enabled us to bring these community leaders into the forum and create a space that allowed for their important perspectives to shine through. We used a participatory mapping exercise that allowed the youth leaders' expertise from their communities to shine. Often in these approaches where you have the independent panel who are very established peacebuilding experts in the community, and you have youth leaders from their communities, there's a power imbalance. But using a participatory mapping exercise allowed for an equal playing field. It allowed for the expertise of the communities to shine through, and it really allowed for a deeper level of conversation that really meant that the recommendations and the information the panel received was driven by the community. The second and third convenings we did were with diverse long-term peacebuilding practitioners from Kenya, from the greater Eastern Horn of Africa. In one of these meetings, we did a scenario development exercise where jointly with the panel, we identified sort of core issues that were coming out from the consultations, things like land rights, climate migration, controversial issues that were hard to dive into what really needed to be done, and develop these scenarios that created a space where the peacebuilders could focus this discussion and bring their technical knowledge to build recommendations and solutions that fed into the report. One of the most interesting exercise was the third aspect, where the many challenges and the recommendations from the process, the panel wanted a way to sort of stress test what they were thinking in terms of solutions, recommendations for the report. And so jointly, we sort of designed a peer-to-peer feedback workshop that allowed the pros and cons of different recommendations to be discussed. It was a small group of peacebuilding experts, a safe space, and it really allowed for a constructive conversation that went quite deep into the different issues and recommendations that really made sure that what came out was going to be effective. And this consistency of engagement throughout the process allowed us to ensure that the voices that we were hearing and the voices we brought to the table were accurately represented in the report. By having a review report, as you've heard today, that represents the broad range of actors, one's just increasing the likelihood of public interest, the acceptance of the outcomes, and then ultimately policy change that will address the core issues. And that's why I think there's been so much emphasis now on the shift to implementation, because implementing the recommendations will really address the core issues. But I think a core component of the partnership between us and the panel was that it was based on trust. We were able to bring new methodologies in based on meaningful engagement and avoid a lot of the common pitfalls of consultations. For example, we designed processes where equitable discussion was central. The participatory mapping, as I said, allowed the youth expertise to create an equal ground of conversation between them and the high-level panel. There was genuine discussion that provided robust opportunities to challenge recommendations and avoid this extractive, tokenistic approach that we see a lot of the time. So ultimately, the review secretariat and the independent panel realized the importance of co-creation, of cooperation, and consistent engagement, and that working in this manner would allow new voices to come forward, new views, and new recommendations that would really represent the population and, when implemented, address the core issues. It laid the foundation for long-term effective prevention. And this way of working really highlights and upholds the call for inclusion and longer-term engagement with diverse national and local actors, and is really a central point that's highlighted in the UN Sustaining Peace approach, the new agenda for peace, and is illustrative of an effective way of working with civil society. And I think one of the reasons why we wanted to share this out is that we were seen as a thought partner in this process, and we were empowered to deeply engage, which ultimately led to a stronger process, stronger content, and stronger engagement. And it's a really strong example of how you can effectively partner with civil society organizations in these review processes.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and I really appreciate you providing some of the concrete examples for us to think about and learn from. We have now about 15 or so minutes for question and answer. I know we already have a couple in the chat. We do have mics going around for the room if anyone has a question and wants to raise their hand. Sure, maybe if you can wait just 1 minute for the microphone so we can all hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have an input on inclusivity. The Peacebuilding review for our country met different people. We started with key informant interviews where we interviewed 502 people. And then we had over 100 focus group discussions. And then there was a digital survey where 3,258 youths participated. As you all know, most of the youths are in the digital spaces. We had household interviews where 4,500 households were participated. This was done by the Kenya National, we followed the guideline from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And nationally representative, the surveys were done in 1,450 wards in 47 counties and 8 regions. And on the International Day of Peace, we met over 500 participants, out of which 300 were youths, and they gave their input. We met 90 non-governmental organizations. We met 32 national institutions. We met 22 members of parliament, including the Council of Governors, the Senate. We met 17 international organizations. We met 17 universities and think tanks. We met 13 donor countries. We had 6 professional networks. We met with 9 religious bodies, women, youth. We met with cultural leaders, people living with disabilities. We talked with the opposition. We talked with the teachers. We talked with the judiciary. And we had individual inputs we had 20 national consultations where there were 749 participants. We had 9 expert roundtables where we had 181 participants. We held 3 future workshops where there was 109 participants. We were envisioning what kind of future of Kenya we want. And there was also one call for public participation from the Ministry of Interior, where Mr. Omolo heads, where 1,225 participants gave their views. And these views were given by Inspector Generals. We had the county commissioner, the regional county commissioners, and we had, as he said, over 10,800 people participating in giving their views. As you can see, we really, really tried to include. We used the mantra of leave no one behind. So that what we did is we were closing the gaps so that nobody will come up and say, we are not represented. Whatever we are giving are the views of the people we have met. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. What I'm taking away from you is that there is no secret magic to doing community-based and being inclusive. It's just about actually getting out and doing the work, finding the people, meeting with the people. That is how you make it inclusive. Other questions in the room? I have my own questions, but I'll leave the floor open. I'll throw one out and watch for hands. As I mentioned earlier, you talked about how inclusive the process was in terms of putting the document together, but I'd love to learn what you imagine is the role for all of these communities in terms of implementation, how it will continue to be inclusive moving forward, accountability to all of those voices that you're trying to represent, and making sure that implementation is actually responsive to the views that you've collected. So that would be my question. Anyone else in the room want to ask? All right, I see a couple online. We had one about youth, but I think that was addressed quite well. We had another question that had to do an emphasis on the prevention aspect, specifically the role of conflict early warning systems. What does the panel think about establishing, and forgive me if I'm getting these acronyms wrong, CWARNs and CWERIS, especially in historically conflict-prone areas? So that's another question. And then finally, a question on whether the document will be available to the general public. So maybe I can turn to the panel. Dr. Omolo, to you first, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Maybe one of the most important things to actually appreciate is the structure within the way the national government is put, particularly within the Ministry of Interior and National Government in terms of the representation. So as a country, we have the national government, but then we have 8 regions. Then below the 8 regions, you have 47 counties. When you come down below the counties, you have what we call the sub-counties. There are over 380 of them. Then you come to the division, another layer. Then you come to the locations, the sub-locations, and the villages. And in terms of reach of the national government, I have representation all the way to the village level. So at the village level, you have what you're calling the peace committees. And one of the things that we were able to pick out of the peace review architecture is that these are very solid instruments that can be used to be agents for peace prevention. And looking at some of the gaps that have been picked out of the architecture, it becomes very critical that as you address the gaps in terms of capacity. So you need to capacitate the officers, but also to have it possible for the communities to positively engage. But then there are other aspects of what then would lead to insecurity or conflict. And one of the major things that we need to pay close attention is the climate instigated conflict. And as we work on the preventions, we need to look out and see how to address the element of climate change. In terms of the early warning systems, is that there are traditional known sources of conflict. We are looking at the boundary conflicts. You are looking at the conflict that arise out of representation in terms of the leadership position. So that is another area that a lot of focus needs to go into. As to sharing the report, I think we are more than happy, and part of our discussion this afternoon is to be able to share with the world what we've been able to do, and the report will be available for sharing. And lastly, the aspect of the financing. We are talking of a peace building fund, and I'm sure that there are perfect examples starting with the UN on how we can be able to work around and make this functional. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sheikh, I wonder if I can turn back to you as well for your response to some of the questions that were posed.
I want to touch on the first one in terms of responses to the people who have been included in the process. The recommendation that we do have is that we're going to establish a structure like Dr. Mola has already mentioned, which is going to start from the highest level, which is his office or the minister's office, going all the way up to the grassroots level. So structurally, we're going to engage people at all the different levels horizontally. On the vertical level, we have said that there's going to be a mapping, extensive mapping of all the peace builders that we have engaged now and others that we have not engaged. So we are going to have a network of all peace workers who are going to be brought down through a system whereby there's going to be an umbrella body that will be able to know who is doing what at what particular place. So they are being brought on board for coordination in terms of peace building, in terms of capacity building for each and every one of them, in terms of sharing the resources, and more importantly, we are looking at getting further funding not only from the government of Kenya and other donors from outside. We are looking at the private sector in Kenya. I just want to give you an example. When we had demonstrations in the streets of Nairobi, the town was closed down for almost 3 days. In terms of economic loss, we are talking about billions of dollars that we have lost. And most of that money is lost by Kenyan people, but more so the private sector. So it is better for them to invest, put a little bit of investment into peace building, which is going to be for their own benefit and for the whole country. So we're trying to throw up a wider net in terms of raising resources. And those resources are not specifically coming to government. It's coming to the government and all the peace workers. So that's how we expect that everybody is going to be involved. In terms of the early warning system, we're already working with the IGAD early warning system and with the East African Community early warning system. It has been working very well, but it requires to be enhanced in various places. That we need to go into details by the time we start the implementation, so that actually we see how we're going to act aggressively in terms of getting it working much more effective than now. And as was mentioned by Dr. Omolo, the climate issue is a major issue at the moment. A lot of conflicts in the northern part of the country, and particularly among the pastoralist community, is in terms of competition for the natural resources that is there. Grass is getting less, water is getting less, people are crossing the border, and because of availability of small arms and light weapons that comes across the border, everybody's arming himself so that actually they can take more land for grazing. So the climate issue is a major issue that we need to address, and we have to look for how we can mitigate the current climate factor that has come in. The other issue that we do have is lack of proper coordination across the border. There is some cooperation that's going on, we know, between Kenya and Somalia, between Kenya and Ethiopia, between Kenya and Uganda. But we need to strengthen that furthermore so that the local people at the grassroots level will be empowered, not expecting resources from the government alone, but will be empowered with resources that they can engage much, much more earlier before we call in the military. So all that is put in it's within the report. I'm glad to report that actually the president himself is going to launch the report very, very soon. And it's going to be a public document that will be available to everybody. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, any other? Yeah, can you, sorry, we just need to make sure you get a microphone so our online guests can hear you. Thank you.
To add on that, what we really want is to localize and domesticate the peace building architecture so that the local person can understand it in their own language. As you all know, we have around almost 45 tribes, so that the local person can have ownership of the peace building architecture. They feel that they own the peace building. It's not the government. It's their duty to ensure wherever they are, the space they are living in is peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other comment in the room or question? Maybe we can, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to add on the comment on early warning and early response. That has been indicated that Kenya has been working very closely with the IGAD system, but also to note that Kenya was the first country to domesticate the C1 system. It was also the first one to also have the National Early Warning and Early Response Mechanism, which is based within the Ministry of Interior. There has been continuous engagement with the Sewerus, Conflict Early Warning and Early Response Units, and those are structures that link directly to the lowest level, as Dr. Omolo has indicated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe I can turn back to Rana and Leslie for any final thoughts. And if you can, to integrate the point about the cross-border aspect, because right now we're talking about national prevention strategies, but we know today so many risks that countries face are not merely domestic risks and are in fact cross-border. So how do we understand that element when we're thinking about the creation of national prevention strategies?
Perhaps one of the strongest elements of the Kenyan constitution is devolution. And in principle, this is one of the proudest elements for all Kenyans, the devolution of powers. And I think that applies also to the principle of peace building. Kenya already has as Dr. Omolo has pointed out, has the structures from the top all the way down. The question becomes also, how do you actually localize it even more and integrate it into the mainstream systems of response? Because it's one thing to receive the early warning, but then call the police, and another thing to say, this is the early warning, now we have we unleash the peace building committee. So it's now optimizing that response is where we need to get to. It's about also deepening the localization, giving the resources. It's not only about having the structure in place, it's about giving it the resources, empowering these committees to do what they need to do. Thank you.
I think that what I'll say is sort of two main points. One is on the implementation, is that in addition to what's been shared on the strategy behind this, is the importance of being transparent in what's being done and ensuring that there's a full picture and a full understanding by the population of the commitment and the action to actually implement. And then on the fact that a lot of the peace and security issues are not national issues, I think that's why it's important that this is not seen in isolation. This is a national review. Kenya is a significant player in the region and is playing a strong role at the global level. It's all an integrated issue, and I hope that this review can just start the conversation within the region and in a global context of how we can work together to try and address these issues.
Thank you so much to that. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today and the other members of the IPA that were able to attend. This is a moment in time where there's a lot of thought being given toward the Summit of the Future and the Pact and how to implement the new agenda for peace. And we're really grateful to Kenya for being such a leader within this space, for providing such a good example for all of us and providing this food for thought as we try to think about how to enhance universal prevention for all countries. So thank you so much for being here today. Before we wrap up and to help us conclude, we have two speakers to provide closing remarks. First, I'm very happy to welcome Ambassador Martin Kimani, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Kenya to the UN, followed by Ambassador Anna Karin Ennerstrom, Permanent Representative of Sweden to the United Nations. Ambassador, I think we'll pull out the podium for you, and then the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for welcoming us here as Kenya, and thank you all for attending. It's always a great occasion to visit IPI. So much good thinking happens here, and it's very helpful to delegations. I have prepared remarks, but I think I'll stray from them a little bit. And that is to say, we really are missing General Daniel Opande. And I'm so glad that he's being represented here. General Opande, for those of you who are followers of peacekeeping, is a legendary figure in peacekeeping. Many of you may remember, if you know him famously driving into a camp of rebels that had kidnapped some UN peacekeepers and basically giving them a lecture and driving away with his soldiers. And that is the kind of person he is. In 2007, at the end of 2007, we had a terrible, terrible event of post-election violence when we simply could not agree on how that election had turned out. And this led to widespread violence that fundamentally changed Kenya. On that occasion, General Opande and General Sumbeyo came together with a group of other peace builders and created a group called Concerned Kenyans for Peace. And that group, many of the peace builders who are here were involved in one way or another in that mobilization of Kenyans. And that is a group that got together with the rest of civil society, put pressure on business. So a few days after the violence started, politicians who were divisive were no longer being covered in the media. The private sector came and joined hands with peace builders. There were people trying to rescue those who were being attacked. It was a national effort. And I was very proud at that time to be involved by General Opande. And I count that as the beginning of my public service, because when I saw Kenya in that state, I determined that one day I was going to have to do something about it. So we miss General Opande, and we hope he recovers quickly and is able to one day visit us here and tell us more about his experience. The second thing is Principal Secretary Raymond Omolo is a very modest person. He has a modest demeanor and a modest way about him. And that really does not communicate that he is in charge of the most extensive conflict prevention system in Kenya. Under him are thousands of locations and sub-locations, I think something like 4,000 locations and something like 9,000 or almost 10,000 sub-locations. In every village and town in Kenya, he has somebody whose job it is to work with the community to prevent conflict. And they all report up to him. And he's also the biggest funder of Kenyan conflict prevention. He spends much more than all UN agencies in Kenya in the work of protecting the peace. Therefore, him being here is really a testament to the determination of the government to take this review and implement it. And there's no better platform of partnership there than those chiefs and sub-chiefs down there who are also working with elders, they're working with NGOs, and they have peace committees. Our architecture is extensive. What it needs now are the partnerships that allow it to get to the next level. Yeah, and that I think is a big reason why we should propagate the word, let people know, and let people know that Kenya is ready to engage. I've heard so much here about inclusion, but I think I want to underline that I think we underestimate what we mean, what we should mean by inclusion. The ability of the state to actually be inclusive in a fair and transparent way is a key state competence. The same way we talk about state security, state inclusion is utterly key to maintaining peace and stability and long-term economic development. And I think Kenya, over time, has determined that this competence in building peace is a key part of what our state needs to deliver. And our constitution in 2010 underlined that a great deal. When I was, you've also heard a bit about the conflict and early warning mechanism. Well, I used to direct the conflict and early warning mechanism in Addis, and it was a regional IGAD program. And it was in Kenya that it was most active. And it used to this day, it works with the conflict early warning committees and groups all around the country. And it gathers data that is available to PS Omolo and seeks to actually prevent peace through early warning. So when the workers for the Siweru see a conflict trend emerging, rather than wait for it to escalate, they try and actually arrest it before it goes too far. And they do that by engaging the government, again, the security agencies, the chiefs and sub-chiefs, and the peace committees on the ground. I saw through that experience that peace building in Kenya and our region is not a new activity. It is actually as old as mankind. All the groupings, all the conflicts you see in the border areas are usually over resources, over grass, pasture, and water especially. And as climate change effects get worse, these conflicts are bound to actually increase. However, it is good to understand that each of those groupings have long-lasting agreements about who's supposed to be where, when. And it's when those disagreements, when you cross into somebody else's territory, you bring your cows to someone else's territory, the fighting begins. So underneath our social and cultural life are essentially treaties. And these treaties need to keep being renewed all the time. If I was doing a new doctorate, I would actually do it on this and look at the peace treaties at the local level, owned by communities. They're there, they're very old, and they work very well, especially if the state engages them, which is what happens when the chiefs and the sub-chiefs are working with elders. So ladies and gentlemen, Kenya has a lot to offer in terms of partnership. As we step forward into the Pact for the Future, and we're negotiating the Pact for the Future, I take what Kenya has brought to New York this week to be a living example for delegations to take some of our insights and bring them to the negotiating table so that the Summit of the Future speaks directly and practically to the work of peace building. We hope it will inspire you. Our delegation will be ready to provide you with any further information that you may need about this worthwhile effort and how we can turn it into an effective negotiating platform. Thank you very much, IPI, for inviting me to speak. And of course, I shall be in touch with you because I'll be right downstairs. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak after my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Martin Kimani. I think it's been a really, really good discussion. Sweden is proud to have partnering with the UN and Kenya in elaborating this strategy. And it has been such an interesting discussion to hear about how you have worked to have this strategy nationally owned, inclusive, comprehensive, and consultative. And my thanks goes, of course, to Permanent Secretary to the UN, but also to the advisory panel with its members here today. And I think Martin is very right when he is saying that this is such an inspiration for other countries to follow. But I would say also, especially to the Permanent Secretary, that this really takes courage and political will, as you have said yourself, in order to develop this kind of strategy on prevention and peace building. I come from a country that's worked with prevention for a very long time. Ever since I started at the ministry, which is a long, long time ago, prevention has been sort of the core of our work. But it's also, we have also experienced how difficult it is to work with prevention. We have, discussed, should we use another word than prevention? Should we use risk? Should we use something else? Because it's such a sensitive concept. But I think the way that you have laid it out for us today shows how important it is, like my Norwegian colleague said, to have real examples on how you work with prevention and peace building. So that was my first point. My second point is on the Summit of the Future and how important it is that we take this opportunity to strengthen the prevention, but also the peace building, and especially the Peace Building Commission. So I was here in 2005 when the Peace Building Commission was established, and I actually worked on the resolution. And yesterday during the weekend, I was going through papers because I'm moving soon. So I was going through papers and I read this article from New York Times in September 2006. And it said that the Peace Building Commission's mandate was to deliver reports to the Security Council. And maybe then it would adopt an annual report. But it shows also how far the Peace Building Commission has actually moved since it was established in 2005. And I certainly hope that with the Summit of the Future, that we will move even further when it comes to strengthen the role, and also that the Peace Building Commission could be the arena and the platform to have exchanges with other countries on their peace building strategies, and to build that into, as others have spoken about, to the regional context and to the global context. My last point is on financing, and I'm also saying that because Ambassador Martin Kimani and I co-facilitated the resolution on peace building funding a couple of years ago, that finally led to the decision by the General Assembly, Fifth Committee and General Assembly, to contribute with assessed contribution to the peace building fund. So I just want to underline finally how important the financial issue is. The financing into peace building, into prevention, and into sustaining peace is of course key, and especially key as we are talking about the implementation of these strategies. So thank you so much, and it's been a really, really good discussion, and looking forward also to the discussion tomorrow when Norway and Timor-Leste will also present their peace building strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone again for being here, and a special thanks to our partners on today's event, the Life and Peace Institute and the permanent missions of Kenya and Norway and Sweden to the UN. And a real big thanks to all of our Kenyan colleagues who have come all the way here for your willingness to share your experiences with us. And we look forward to your continued engagement. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you for coming.